now it's time to welcome our first keynote speaker, a man who used to be a city architect of Barcelona. He participated in the Venice Biennale 4 times, and now he leads the master's program in advanced ecological buildings and conducts research in wooden construction. And he's going to explain us what needs to be done to transform our cities into biocities. So welcome Vicente Guallart, founder of Guallart Architects.
Thank you.
Welcome, Vicente.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to this wonderful city and this wonderful event. Yeah, I would like to share some of my projects and ideas and the process we have been following in the last years about the carbonization. The first thing is that since 10 years ago we are working not as we used to do 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was the digital revolution. And then at that moment, we started to work with software engineers and so on in order to see how we could introduce the digital technologies into architecture. Now, somehow we know how this will work. This is already happening. Now we have the artificial intelligence and so on. But now, since 10 years ago, we are working with forest engineers, with biologists, in order to understand better the planet and better the nature, because the biggest challenge that we have in front of us, in fact, is how we can have a better integration with the nature, and I will explain about that. Talking with them, they remember us that, in fact, we came down from a tree in order to become humans. In fact, our genetic ancestors are still there. So that's why we feel so well in the forest, because the forests for us are home. We came from a forest, and in fact, the first representation, when Vitruvio was talking about the beginning of architecture and all the history of the Western architecture, is related with the tree and the column as the beginning of the structure for our buildings. I was chief architect of Barcelona during 4 years, and I had the opportunity to be, in fact, this was from 2011 to 2015, and it was a moment of a big crisis after the 2008 global crisis on the construction, on the economy. And then I was very much interested in this long-term vision, because if you don't have a long-term vision, what you do every day is business as usual. You need to have a good plan on the middle term, or otherwise what you do every day is to try to solve problems. That's why, in fact, I was trying to look into our history. And then here I realized that part of the background of Barcelona is this idea that it was a city founded by the Romans, but we had been trying to do good architecture since the very beginning, and you can find us in many few cities in the world, very good Gothic architecture, very good modernist architecture, and very good modern architecture. So that means that in our genes, and I think that, in fact, in Prague, we can also see, and many other cities around the world, is the genes that the society is expressed through architecture. The way we build our ambitions for the future is represented with stones or with the material that we have in every generation in our cities. I also was interested about the mathematics of the history, on how the cycles of the history are happening, what is the speed of the changes. And then if we focus in the Industrial Revolution, what I realize is that every 50 years we have had a big change in our urban model. So we have a We change our car. The car models are changed every 5 years. In fact, the iPhones are changed every year. But then cities is the biggest artificial structure that the humans we have done. And then, I mean, to change the idea about what are the rules for the cities, it takes a lot of time. And in fact, it needs a very big crisis in order that this happen. And I will try to explain this in order to frame why we are right now in a big moment of change that only happen every 50 years. If we see, in fact, the first industrial revolution, two things that changed the cities were the guns and the steam machine. Because at that time, the cities used to be like this, used to be cities with narrow streets, like still a medieval structure, but something that changed the cities in Europe and after that in the world was the steam train. In fact, in Barcelona, we have the engineer Ildefons Cerdà that did a plan on the extension of the city, as I say, in many other cities in Europe, moving from this narrow street format to a wider and more rational approach in order to include also new forms of engineering. In fact, these new forms of engineering, like you see here, you see still the street that we have today. And this was invented at that moment. A street where we have sidewalks, where we have light, public lighting, where we have streets, where we have trees, and where we have public transportation or segregation of transportation. So we have the same streets that were invented like 150 years ago. This was the moment of the urbanization of many cities, and what is interesting is that Ildefons Cerdà invented the word urbanization. The word urbanization was invented in Barcelona. The interesting thing is that moment was a moment of big changes of the development with the new technologies. There were many people doing science. In fact, Darwin wrote on the origin of a species in 1859, the year that the expansion of Barcelona was approved, and Darwin inspired Haeckel to coin the word ecology. Ecology was coined in the year 1866, and then in the year 67, Marx published The Capital, and Cerdà published The General Theory of Urbanization. So ecology and urbanization were coined at the same moment of the history. And it was also the moment where every change produced social crisis. And that's why Marx and other people were doing theories about what could happen. I mean, there were people that say, we should do the social revolution first, and we'll see what happened. There were others, like Cerdà, that say, we should use science to improve the life of people. So let's try to do the revolution by making cities and making better life for the people. Today, we have more or less the same situation. We have I would say, a big technological transformation, and also we have a big crisis about what we should promote equality and how we should combine ecology and urbanization. The next big change happened 50 years later with the First World War, and also this is a picture from what it was so-called the Spanish flu. It was a big pandemia in the 20s. Remember that pandemias also was very important in the middle of the 19th century in order to demolish the walls. And this was the moment when Bauhaus was founded. It was the moment when also Hilverseimer and others were thinking about what the new city should look like. And it was also the moment when the Mies van der Rohe Pavilion was built. But if you see three things that happened in that time, the development of the car industry, the development of concrete, and the monofunctionalism in the cities, this is, in fact, what is destroying the planet, you know? So that means that what it seems to be a great idea about how to improve the quality of life of people, what happens is when you arrive to some scale, that means with so many people are using these, I would say, technologies or solutions, then the system explodes. We have seen the impact of this monofunctionalism. We have seen, this is in fact, by the way, Barcelona, again, where we have seen also these kind of monofunctional neighborhoods. These were the good ideas of the 1950s, no? That there were some activists like James Jacobs stopping that, and these were also some other ideas coming from these technologies, no? So we need to be aware that what a good technology can produce is not only good, it also depends on the scale. We had the next crisis in the 1970s. It was also a political crisis. We have a war in the Middle East. There was the crisis of the energy, and it was also the Paris of the '68, and the people complaining about why we are living as we are living. So that means that I was born in Valencia, and in Valencia there was a project in order to put in a riverbed, a medieval riverbed, to put highways, and only because the people were complaining, today they stopped the project, and today we have a green river. So that means that the implication of the society in the solutions is fundamental also in order to define the future. It was also that moment when we stopped to grow and cities start to look to inside. It was the beginning of the reform of the city centers. Maybe the Pompidou that inspired many projects in other cities were fundamental in order to expand the expansion of the suburbia. We had also in Barcelona many other good samples about the public space, but also the Bilbao effect generate some other strange situation, no? Every mayor in the planet wanted to have a Bilbao. But now we arrived to 2020, and in 2020 was a year where we had the beginning of the COVID. So look how similar are the two pictures with 100 years of difference. It was the moment when we start to see that the quality of the air of many cities is not acceptable. So the question also that the emissions of the CO2 emissions is growing so much, and it was the moment when in Europe they say we need to stop that, and they did make a great move. They agreed that by 2050 we should be a continent of zero emissions. So if you see this pattern, 2020 is the beginning of something new. And then this something new is what? So how we are going to do that? If we see the changes from the industrial city to the modern city of Bauhaus, the change was huge. It was the moment of the beginning of the highways. Or if we see the beginning of the urban regeneration in the 70s, change is huge. So what we think is that we need to change structurally our urban model. And we need to move to a model where the city follow the rules of nature, of natural systems, in order to promote life and biodiversity. So if we see today our cities are like this, are cities that are producing CO2, that bring concrete, use petrochemical, bring food with containers and so on. But if we see how works the nature, obviously the nature and the forests have millions of years, when architecture is only 10,000 years old. With 1,000 more years, building will fly. It's clear, but we need to arrive alive over there. But if we see how the biocity should be, we should make cities that use renewable energy, cities that absorb CO2 instead of expel CO2, cities that use the material that we have around, like the timber from the forest, in order to make our buildings, produce the food locally, and so on. So this is the good news about this, is that we have already all the technologies that we need in order to make this. The only thing that we need is to make a major shift. We need to integrate all these solutions in a system that will allow to transform our cities. Because until now, we had been using mineral-based construction materials, and we could move to a bio-based construction material where the impact of using, as some people say, using death resources, the resources that are death. I mean, when the nature died, it produced the carbon and the millions of years ago, and the oil. Now we should keep working with the nature that is above the earth. And that's why, well, there are many similitudes about how we follow the structures of the forest with the different layers that we can see also in the forest, with the different systems of interconnections that could transform our cities. In fact, another fundamental topic is about the urban organization. I suppose that you recognize Moscow, but also Beijing, Madrid, Paris, many other cities that used to be the capital of an empire are super centralized, and there are many cities that have been growing like an egg. And then what we proposed when I was chief architect is to have this decentralized system organized by neighborhoods that are connected between each other. So this seems to be an industrial system. This is an internet system created by many neighborhoods that are connected and make and promote that the life in every neighborhood is good. So they call, in Paris, they call this the city of 16 minutes, and this is like in nature. You know, a wolf don't take the tram in order to eat deer like 100 kilometers away. I mean, the animals always try to look the food as near as they can. And then that means that this idea of moving as less as you can is better for the cities. I wrote some years ago a book, The Self-Sufficient City, where I was proposing, this was 2012, the cities of zero emissions, that now somehow is the official mantra in the European Union. It was translated to Chinese, but in China, they are still building like this. But in 2020, again, they launched a competition. They are developing a city called Shuang, that is near Beijing. I have been doing many projects and competitions there, and then we won this competition in 2020. It was a moment where we were in the hard lockdown. All our team were at home, and we said, okay, we have the opportunity to make a competition for 4 blocks in Shuang. Let's try to be very radical in order to define how the buildings in the future should be. So I proposed a system of mixing different typologies, the European block, the modern city blocks, and also the solar greenhouses, because part of our idea is that we need to move from an economical system where we're producing anywhere in the world and we send anywhere in the world. So when we talk about the circular economy, we need to take care that should be the local circular economy. Because today the circular economy is taking wood from Africa, sending to China, and selling a product somewhere in America, you know? So that means we should close the circle, and what we should do is to produce locally things while we are connected globally. So as local as we produce will be better, but this doesn't mean to isolate from the others. That means that the way we collaborate, cooperate, and we create exchange is using digital technologies, using the networks, but the production of resources should be as local as possible. And that means producing energy, producing food, and producing things locally. In this competition, we proposed these 4 blocks where all buildings were done with timber, where we had also working places above the houses, and where we have some solar greenhouses, where we had big terraces where we were working. I mean, this was exactly the moment of the pandemic, where we have the courtyard, that this is something in the Central Europe. You have so much, where there were also public facilities connected with the place where we live, where we were creating an internal metabolism in the city. So that means that the building should be like this, should produce energy, produce food, in the upper part, produce things in the ground floor, and so on. So there are different technologies about producing food in cities, and then in this case, we were creating or designing some solar greenhouse with solar panels, and also using LED farming when necessary. We're proposing also market, and in the ground floor, we were proposing also using 3D printer technologies. During the pandemic, we were printing masks. I don't know if this happened here in Czechia, but using 3D printing, we saved many lives. I mean, the freaky people with 3D printers were saving lives, while the big government were not able to provide masks for everyone. And somehow, This brings me also to our institute. She mentioned I am the founder of the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, where we have been working with robots. As I said, 20 years ago, we were working with MIT and with digital technologies and so on. We're producing also, this was for the solar decathlon, some of the first solar houses in Spain made with timber, using flexible solar panels, all of these using robots in order to fabricate these prototypes. And also we produced this prototype in 2011 in order to use solar panels not only in the roof, but also in the facades of the building. But one of the important moves that we did after working, and we are still working with digital technologies, was we were able to buy a piece of forest near Barcelona. This is Barcelona. And then here, what we have created is a place to do a kind of experiment. So part of our idea was, can we use the nature in order to provide us of material to make energy, to make constructions, to provide food, to manage the water, and so on. So we launched a master program, as she mentioned before, where what we try to do is this. I mean, architects, we have been trained. It depends on the generations, but we have been trained in order to be kind of big artists. And then what happened, in fact, in the last years, is the architect was trying to do the biggest icon after the Guggenheim example and so on. No? So we're more focused on the form and not focused in the whole process. What we discovered now is that we should take care not only about the final design, but also about the origin of the materials, how we deal with the materials, how we transform it, which is the industrialization process that we have with it, and then at the end to be able to do a good building that in fact will be able to be reused in the future. So that means that what happened with the architects, that we don't know anything about the origin of material, we don't know anything about the nature, we don't know anything about many things. We don't know to measure CO2, we don't know to measure emissions and so on. So what we do here is we try to have an holistic education where every year we are able also to do, we have a sustainable forest management plan where we can cut some of the trees. By the way, now we have a very dry season and many trees are dying because it's not raining in the south of Europe. And then we are able to, we bought some machines, they are not digital anymore, but we can produce lumber out of the trees. We have, this is maybe the smallest CLT plant in Europe, you know, because we can produce panels of cross-laminated timber like these ones, and every year we do a prototype. So what we do is education learning by doing, where students are going to the forest, taking the tree, manipulating the timber, and then creating panels. This is the year, this is 2020 also, the year of the pandemic where the students were in a hard lockdown and we are able to produce, we were producing a project that year. The project was to do a quarantine cabin, a cabin to do quarantines that in fact New York Times was talking about it, about new concepts for an unpredictable future. So part of the future is related with education. If we don't change the way we work, if we don't change the way we learn, the change is impossible. Because that means that we are not trained. I mean, you can have a fantastic, in Barcelona we are quite good in sports, although sometimes we lose, as we are doing now. But you know, if you have a guy that is like this, another that run a lot, and you can play football, it's good. But the same team, you cannot play basketball, you know? So that means that if we used to do iconic architecture in some way, the way we organize the team was in some way. But we want to do ecological buildings and doing the carbonization. We need to change the team. We need to change the way we learn. We did another project inspired by our project in China. We did another project that was to do a solar greenhouse. We said, okay, let's do a prototype of what we were imagining in China, and then working with students again. We do this in a cycle of 4 months. In 4 months, we design and build every prototype. We design these solar surfaces where the light is passing also through. We were able to do this prototype that, in fact, where we were testing how to produce food in a small scale, following the idea that we had in China that could be applied to other projects. We're also using LED for the night production of food. In 2022, we architects, we were able to manage to be Barcelona European Forest City. And then we did a big seminar talking about biocities. But then we create a grid having the support of Built by Nature, that is a Dutch foundation. It's incredible. Dutch foundation using money from the fashion industry is promoting decarbonization in Europe. It's called the Lauder Foundation and Built by Nature. We have created this network in Spain, and then we were in a big dilemma, because the car industry, they say that by 2035, cars using petrol and diesel will be banned to sell. But what happened with construction? What happened with concrete? What happened with this process of decarbonization of our industry? We don't have yet very clear rules about how this should happen. We don't have deadline. I have been working as chief architect, and I know that a good regulation will change everything. If you say this is the limit of you can do, it's like in the highway. You cannot go to 100 kilometers per hour. Your building should not have so many emissions, because if not, this will not work. Anyhow, we were thinking how to do an exhibition in the Mies pavilion, and we said, okay, let's do a pavilion inside the pavilion. And then we asked permission to do a kind of manifesto inside the manifesto of Mies van der Rohe. And then what we did was to do a building or some structure. This was entering from the back. And then we were doing a kind of balcony with timber on the top of the Mies pavilion. We created a small auditorium. We were, in the onyx wall, we were doing a timber CNC wall using different pieces of wood in order, when you erase the wood with the CNC, we were able to reproduce the same drawing as that Mies had with the onyx. And then we did a big celebration that somehow was trying to explain that we need to create a bridge between 20th century and the 21st century. We did also a protocol that we are still discussing with the city council that says that we need to declare, in the same way that architects, we say, the building will have these square meters. You cannot do more because the regulations say you have these square meters. This is the maximum height. We should have also a limit for the emissions, because if we don't do that, then nothing will happen. We will be in the 2010, we're talking about the 2020. The 2020 will be very important. We are right to the 2020, and we say now we talk about the 2030, and in the 2030 we'll talk about the 2040. So that means that we need, at some point, and this is the exciting thing, is the moment of change. There will be business for everyone, but the business will be different. So that means that we need to change the way we work. We have done this report on Mas Madera. We have been discussing about how to do all this process, and this is going on. Another incredible thing that happened in 2020 is that the city of Barcelona decided, also listening to some people, they launched a competition where in the bidding process, the reduction of price was only 10% of the points, but the reduction of emissions was 30%, and the reduction of time of construction was another 30%. So that means there was a clear statement about how new ways of bidding process should happen. There were 4 competitions at the same time. Bad news is that we lose 3 competitions. Good news is we won 1. And this one that we won is this building that is here. In fact, right now is the tallest timber building in Spain, where we proposed also, it was during the pandemic, to have the biggest terraces that we could have. This is 40 apartments of social housing, where you see that the terrace should be also in the Spanish climate is more than possible to be outdoor, to be, the terraces are quite big in comparison even with the apartments. But also, we were also tracking very much on the process of how we do this circular design with all the structure done with timber. There is no underground for parking in this situation. And then something we were learning, it was our first big timber project, is how to build using industrialized timber panels of cross-laminated timber, where in fact, as I say, part of the trick is that, when I was a student, no one was talking about this. We are good on making bricks, masonry, and so on. This looks like Germany and the Central Europe, dry construction and so on. Because you have bad weather and maybe you need to concentrate when you build. Now, it's incredible the way we can build, how clean, how fast we can do it in order to get a solution that in fact is using the industrialization. The panels are coming from the factory and here somehow are assembled. But maybe the most interesting thing somehow that is happening in this project is beyond the building itself. So as part of this project, we proposed to the City Council, also in a kind of contest for the new European, next generation resources, to build a solar greenhouse in the rooftop. We are quite good losers, but we learn when we lose. And that's why we say, okay, let's try here. We have big terraces, it's a timber building, let's do a solar greenhouse, and let's do a laboratory of fabrication in the ground floor. And the great miracle is that we are doing it. The great miracle is that the City Council accepted our idea. They put some extra money. We are building a huge solar greenhouse. In order to produce food, we'll be able to produce 75% of the vegetables, or the equivalent in kilograms to the vegetables that the people living in this building will be using. And this is the interior of this space. In fact, last week when we were, that is still under construction with these solar different gradients, because the regulations say we need to have the light passing through. And in the ground floor, we'll have a laboratory of fabrication. When I was chief architect, I was pushing to democratize the innovation and the digital fabrication in all neighborhoods. In the City Council, in the city of Barcelona, now we'll have this laboratory in the ground floor that will be using also some advanced technologies that will be open to the citizen. So somehow this was the image for the competition. This is what we wanted to do with the structure. This is how was the construction with these big balconies, and in fact this is the picture how it's happening right now. Just to finish, 3 more minutes. Barcelona will host the World Congress Architects in 2026. At TIAC, I told you we had been doing, education. Sometimes IAC looks like a lecture hall. Sometimes looks like a teenager club working with computers. Sometimes it looks like an advanced factory. Sometimes it looks like carpentry, and sometimes it looks innovative workshop. But now we got these 2 spaces, and then we are doing a project of transformation in order to transform this place into a new research and education place. So what we are going to do is we'll have the old factory below, and we'll have in the upper part, we'll have new spaces to host innovation and to host people doing education and new companies. So this is the overall structure of the new building that will be connected with some new housing and new other projects that are happening around. This is the biggest space for the new school with robots, fabrication, lectures, and also we'll have a solar greenhouse to learn also how to produce energy, food, and things in the same building. Thank you very much.
Vicente 3D printing. It
Yeah.
was invented here in Prague in the
Yeah.
Czech Technical University, and the prototype went worldwide, and it was printed in Spain as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Just to mention. Okay, back to your topic. Petr Stefek, a very successful architect, writes, I really love your self-sufficient urban blocks for Chinese cities. Have you calculated what percentage of annual food demand would cover rooftop greenhouses?
Well, obviously it depends on the surface, and it depends on the density. There is always a number. I mean, when we do taller buildings, it's much more difficult to make self-sufficient from energy point of view and also for food point of view. So depending on the height and depend on how high is the vertical farming. What is important is that vertical farming allows, in fact, to produce a lot of food only playing with the height. And that means that in the project in China, we could produce 80%, because in fact the buildings were not so tall. The building had offices, and the people living there were mostly like 5, 6 floors. So that means that it depends on the height of the building
and how many people you
and how
put
many
in the
people
building.
live, and depend on the height. And we calculate obviously the equivalent of kilograms that you produce, because it's very difficult to produce wheat, but also in order to make flavor, you need to have it. But you can produce some vegetables and so on. I remember traveling in Iceland, that I learned a lot. In Iceland, in the middle of Iceland, there is one place of 1 hectare with greenhouses that they are producing tomatoes. So they are producing 30% of tomatoes for the whole island in only 1 hectare, because they have they're using the heat of the underground in order to heat the greenhouse. But that means if in Iceland they can produce tomatoes, anywhere can be you can produce tomatoes.
When you mentioned the different climate, there's also a question about that. It always jumps somewhere else, but have you also tried, or is it easier to build a biocity in Spain compared to the Czech Republic or Norway thanks to the warm climate?
Here will be easier, because
It's
you have
too
more
warm
water.
climate.
You have more water. You have more water. Also, density is lower. You have more nature. So I would say that I didn't show it, but if you get the presentation I gave you, then there are 2 projects I'm doing in Africa. I'm building one school in Cameroon using, for first time, local timber for a local building, because normally what they do, as I said before, is they take the timber and they sell to Europe or to China. There it will be even easier, because there are countries that they have so much nature and so much water that the idea of building your environment in continuity with the nature is much more easy. The problem is that in places like in many countries in Africa and other emerging territories, they want to copy the mistakes that others did before. You know, you had a car, I want a car. You know, you were doing emissions, I also want to do emissions. Why you are better than me?
You
So
want 6
it's
highways,
incredible,
they
because
want
in
highways.
Barcelona now we are disasphalting the streets in order to be more ecological, and in Cameroon they are asphalting the streets, you know. So somehow we need to try to align the idea of progress, and obviously idea of progress is very different in different places. But I would say that it's fundamental also to teach with the example. We cannot be saying, "Oh, you are bad because you are doing that," and then we are not doing what we should be doing. So that means that we have some degree of development, that we should be more advanced in the development. And when we do cooperation, I mean, in Africa, they are using all our second and third hand cars over there. The air quality in Yaoundé is horrible because they are using our debris,
Thrown
you
away,
know?
yeah.
So that's completely unacceptable.
Back to the timber buildings, there are many questions coming to that. Do you already have some data? How are the CLT buildings performing in extreme weather, extreme cold and heat waves, periods of heavy rainfall?
Yeah, well, the truth is that obviously the CLT that it was invented here in Austria in the modern form is only 15 or 20 years ago, but the timber has been used for centuries in many places. In Russia, they were using timber for the churches for many generations. In fact, in Spain, the timber we think that it's a low quality material in comparison to others. We use more bricks, but the performance of we are looking for material that is a renewable material that can be extracted with the nature in a sustainable way. And timber and bamboo right now are the best solution. So I would say that maybe in the future there will be other technologies. Right now we have these solutions. Timber is very good for thermal insulation. It's quite good from the structural point of view. From the acoustic, it's not so good when you use in the floor, and then you need to have some other mass in order to avoid it, to pass the sound. But obviously, this is social housing and can be done. So I would say that timber is another material that
will come to the game.
Yeah, exactly.
How do the presented buildings compare price-wise to conventional construction?
Yeah, the price is another typical thing, no? It's like, I went to a Carrefour supermarket last weekend, and then they say, well, you can buy this chicken that has antibiotics, or you can buy this chicken that has been living alone, no antibiotics, And you say, and which is cheaper? They say, yeah, the antibiotics, you will die sooner, So, but it's cheaper. It's cheaper. It's good for you. It's cheaper. You will die sooner. So this is the same for the construction. Right now, it's true that maybe the building with timber can be 10% more expensive, not 35. Depend on the scale, depend on the many other things will change. Remember the solar cells. The first solar cells were used to go to the space, And then right now, making energy with solar cells is cheaper than making with coal. So it's a question of how industry works, how the company is using the timber. It's the first building, our building company, the first building with timber they are doing, so they don't know. They have still the same team. They have the football team playing basketball, And then they need to rearrange, they need to use more computer, maybe less people, and then things will be cheaper and better. Remember the antibiotics in the chicken.
Yeah, they need to learn to dribble.
Yeah.
Okay, do you already, no, sorry, we answered that one. It jumps always. Oh, Vicente, I like your Spanish timber, says Tomas. Timber project. But question is, where do you have all the technology when roof is occupied by greenhouse?
Where you have all the technology?
Yeah, that normally you put on the roof.
Yeah, we are quite good on that, The technology is also in the roof, but no one saw it. So, it's quite amazing. This is social housing, and it has individual air conditioning. So there are 40 machines of air conditioning that they are kind of hidden with the trees that are around. And then this is one side. We have also, there are some transformation station for power in the ground floor. So we have the same technology as the other buildings, but we try to use architecture and design in order to integrate all of this. When I say metabolism, I am a human body. I don't have here my battery, It's quite integrated. So this is biocities, this is bioarchitecture. It's following the rules of nature where everything is integrated in order to do this. This is what new buildings should do.
How have you dealt with fire regulations when designing this timber building?
Well, that's a very typical question. It's the classical question. We follow the fire regulations. The good news about the fire regulations is they say how many minutes a structure must resist. It doesn't say you need to use concrete or you need to use steel. Steel is a disaster for fire regulation. That's why you need to protect the steel, or now you can paint and so on. With timber, it's the same thing. As you know, with 1 centimeter burn in 30 minutes. So that means that you can do two things, or having more timber in your panels, or having some protection. In social housing, then what you do is, as we do, we protect with pladur and other materials because it must be cheaper. But in general, we follow the regulations and that's all. And also the structure. You could say, why? Gravity is the same for everyone, And then we follow the rules of gravity and we do the numbers, and at the end we have our building there.
Where we get our trees from, or what can sustainable forestry look like if everybody starts building with timber? Shouldn't we use wood for high mass structures?
That's another typical question. It's good, it's good. It's the good questions to be discussed. Do you know how much the biomass of a forest grow every year? Do you know?
No?
3%. That means that if you don't do anything and it rains, it will grow 3%. If you don't touch it, next year you'll have another 3%. That means that if you don't manage the forest will explode. And this is what happened, in fact, in Spain. When you see the forest in Spain, it's because the people are living in the rural areas, and they are living to Madrid and other cities because maybe it's more promising, but then you are abandoned the rural areas, and this is a disaster. So that means that managing the forest is good for the forest, because if you remove every year somehow the same amount that it grows, I would say it will be quite stable, but at the same time, the forest will be clean, there will be people living in the rural areas, and so on. So the answer is there are basically two techniques in order to produce wood. One is what is happening in Sweden and Finland or other places where you plant trees that, you plant a tomato and in 3 months you will have a tomato. You plant a pine, you need to take 25 years in order to take a pine to do CLT. The good thing about CLT is that you don't need big dimensions. You can use a small dimensions because with a small pieces of lumber, you glue it and then you have it. So this is one technique. The other is to cut in a selective way. This is what we do in our forest, some of the trees with the right species in order to let the others to grow. So that means that what is proven is that in some countries in Europe where when it's more construction of wood, there is better wood and more profitable and more sustainable because there is some rational thought about it. When there is not a rational thought about it, you have fires, people abandon the rural areas, and so on. So obviously, what we need to avoid is what happened in the Amazons, that then one president arrived and say, you can cut everything, and then that's crazy. But then sustainable means somehow to think on the future and to have a good plan about how you manage your resources.
2 more questions, and I'll ask you to stop asking Vicente because we wouldn't manage to ask other guests. There's a point. I didn't see any insulation in the panels in the photos. So what type of insulation would you use in your CLT panels in case of a colder climate?
Yeah, well, the way it works is you have a CLT panel, then we have insulation outside, and then we have plaster outside, and inside we have also gypsum. So that means that it's a normal facade where the insulation is outside. The insulation doesn't come with the panels. We put manually the insulation there. There are other techniques where everything is more prefabricated and so on, but it's much more complex, for the assemblage.
The question again jumped, so I have to... Did you try to find the way to design the building without using air conditioning? There is a lot of hot air waste produced, which led to cities overheating again. So, any way to cool it without...
There are the passive house standards and so on. Obviously, promote not to use air conditioning and so on. It depends very much, for example, on the orientation. The building we are doing in China were much more passive than the building we are doing here, because by chance, this building is oriented to the northeast, that is a quite bad orientation. This is one thing. Another thing is that the climate right now in summer in Spain and in many places is going very hot. I mean, very warm. In fact, normally we don't used to have air conditioning and only heating system, but now is because the machine is the same, it's an air machine. You can use it, and then that means that you can have cold air and hot air with the same technology. So it was a requirement from the city, and this is what we did. Obviously,
we'll get to that topic here more in detail very soon, so don't worry.
Because basically it depends on if you need to follow some of these principles. Orientation is very important. The depth, that is another thing on the building, is very important, the cross ventilation and so on. In this case, it was a very special plot in an old Coca-Cola factory, by the way, that has been reurbanized, and then is a building that is quite tall and quite narrow.
Vicente Guallart, thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.